Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Harry Burke. I'm the Fellows Manager at the Center for the Political Future, and I am here to kick off a second installment of our Fellows Roundtable series, where we are graced with the presence of one of our three esteemed fellows this semester. This event is going to be, our guest will be Mimi Walters, former U.S. Congresswoman, and she will be engaging in a conversation with two heads of our very esteemed student group, the Unruh Associates, Tommy and Deven. With that, I'm going to introduce and kick it over to Tommy and Deven to introduce Mimi Walters and then get this conversation started. So you guys want to get going?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Harry. Well, yes, hello, I'm Tommy. I'm the current president of Unruh Associates. I'm here for our lovely roundtable. As much as we would like being back in the center, eating pizza and discussing, we hope this conversation will be fruitful, really insightful to the political life and experiences of former Congresswoman Mimi Walters. Mrs. Walters served as a freshman and sophomore representative of the leadership committee for the 14th and 15th Congress. But I'll let her introduce herself a little bit more. And I'll start with a personal question for you, Mrs. Walters, about what was your path in entering politics, and what was your experiences in school as a college student from the school on the other side of the city that provided you the necessary skills and experiences to become an elected official?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed being a fellow at USC, even if I am a Bruin. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to talk with the students. I first got interested in public service when I was in high school. I was brand new to a school in Dana Point, California, called Dana Hills. I didn't know anybody, and so I joined student government, and that was a way that I got to meet students. I was pretty shy at the time, and so it gave me sort of an outlet to get to know people. And I enjoyed it so much that when at the end of my sophomore year, I decided I was going to run for junior class president. And I ran unopposed. Unfortunately, I ran unopposed because I really don't think I would have won. So I got to be president of the junior class, which was awesome. And then I decided that I wanted to run at the end of my junior year. I wanted to run for student body president, but my best friend wanted to run for student body president, and I didn't want to run against her because I didn't want to ruin our friendship. So I decided to run for senior class president instead. And this time I ran against a really, really popular guy. So I was again concerned, I wouldn't win because I wasn't going to be unopposed that time. So fortunately I won. But I think the fact that I was dating the star of the basketball team might have had something to do with it. So that was a little bit of help there. Ended up graduating from Dana Hills, went to UCLA, and had an opportunity to intern on Capitol Hill. I worked for a congressman from Bakersfield when I was a sophomore, went back to DC, and his name is Bill Thomas. He since has retired, and Kevin McCarthy, who is the minority leader, took his spot. And my experience on Capitol Hill as a sophomore in college was just terrific. And I thought someday I wanted to come back and be a member of Congress. So I started sort of planning my future after that experience. But when I got back to UCLA, I got involved in student government there as well. And I worked on some student elections. I didn't run myself, but I ended up my senior year being in charge of the whole elections process. So at the time, now this was 1984, and at that time we had elections where students would go to voting machines. I mean, everything was done by hand at that point. We didn't have computers. We weren't that sophisticated yet when it came to voting. So we had to count ballots, and it was really a very, very big job. I was called e-board chair was what they called it. And having that experience of running the elections gave me sort of an insight to what it was really like to run for office, just seeing the other side and the operational side. So it was all through those experiences that I decided to pursue a career in public service after I got a job in the private sector, got married, had a family. And then in 1996, I ran for my local city council in the city that I grew up.
Awesome. Yeah, we have a position like that too at USC for the USC elections as election commissioner. And their best job is they announce the winners. And it's like the most stressful thing because it's like 100 people packed in the room and they like go through every single slide. You think they're going to give the results, but there's a lot of, power control, but it's so interesting to see the logistics of that as well.
Yeah, it's a really, really big job, and people don't really understand what goes on behind the scenes when you're running an election. And I remember when I was e-board chair and I got criticized for something. I don't even remember what it was now. And then in the Bruin, they did a whole write-up on how bad I was because I did something wrong that people didn't agree with. So I totally got an insight to what it's like to be putting yourself out there. I learned at a very young age. In terms of people taking you on in the press.
Yeah, definitely. So on the note of, you mentioned that you worked in local government, you've also worked in state and federal. So what was your favorite to work in, and what were the challenges you faced in each role? Because obviously it's a different set of constituents, a whole different dynamic at each level, right? And the level of impact. And so we'd love to hear anything about that you have to share.
I think my favorite has been on the federal level. And the reason I say that is because your whole world opens up when you're on the federal level. Just think about it. We're sitting here in California and Congress is in Washington, D.C. I mean, that's 3,000 miles away from us. And when you go to Congress, you are meeting people who represent parts of the whole country. And not only do you meet people who represent parts of our whole country, you're talking to people from other countries. I mean, you have such a diverse group of people that you get to meet and a diverse group of issues that you get to work on that have a huge impact, not only in our nation, but can be in the world. And I just think that that is such an awesome thing to be able to participate in. And, I always felt like everybody in this country and everybody in this world is given one life to live. I sound like a soap opera, one life to live, but seriously, we all are given an opportunity to live and you want to make the most of your life. And I felt like I wanted to have an impact on our society, even if it's a very small impact. I wanted to leave my print. And the way I've been able to do that is through public service. But just the amount of learning on a federal level, and like I said, the exposure to so many different people, it's pretty awesome. It's been a pretty awesome experience.
Yeah, and it's certainly no small impact as well. But talking about entering a career in politics, there's a lot of students at USC, including myself, that are really interested in pursuing a career in politics. Now, obviously, you didn't start right after college, but would you have any advice to students at this age on how to pursue this path?
I think, first of all, in the era of social media, everybody needs to be careful what you post. When I was going through the process and I was young, we didn't even have cell phones. We certainly didn't have social media. And now the vehicles that you can use to communicate to people are unbelievable. It's a really great thing, but it also comes with some caution. I mean, if you're out having fun with your friends and you do something as a joke and you post it on social media, trust me, that's going to come back to haunt you if you want to run for office. And in fact, I'll share this story with you that I shared with my students. I have 4 kids. My youngest son, he works in Washington, D.C. for a member of Congress right now, and he's talking about running for office someday. And he posted something goofy on Twitter about gambling, and it was just a total joke. But I said, if you ever want to run for office, this is going to come back to haunt you, and you need to take it off of Twitter. And he was sort of pushing back on me, and I said, no, I'm serious. You don't understand. This will be used against you. So ultimately, he did take it down. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges your generation faces as you move forward. You have to just be really, really careful what you do in your personal life. I also recommend to people that if you want to run for office, you should have a career first, because in the event you don't win, or in my case, I spent over 20 years as an elected official, and then suddenly I found myself without a job. And now what was I going to do? I mean, I could go into government. I guess I could have worked for a government agency probably, but that's not what I chose. I wanted to do. So I would give the advice to students that get yourself in a career, and then when the time is right, make your way into running for office. It's always important to get involved in the community you live so that you can make a network of people that can help you launch your career. And in the event you don't win, or you decide you don't want to do this anymore after many years, you have a career to fall back on. And that's what I've sort of had to do since I left Congress, is I've sort of had to reinvent myself and figure out, what sort of career path I was going to take after I was gone.
I guess, awesome. So on that note, how, like, a lot of running for office involves coalition building, right? And like really getting your name out there and building that network of supporters, donors, and just in general for your constituency. So how did you build a coalition, whether it be from when you were mayor to kind of when you went up to the federal government? Obviously, they're all different tiers, and so.
Yeah, I was one of those candidates that actually started at the grassroots level as a volunteer.
Okay.
I'm a Republican. In Orange County, we have a very strong Republican Party. And when I first decided to run for local city council, I also got involved in my party at the same time. And that helped give me the tools of what I needed in terms of really learning to run an effective race. And not only did it give me those tools, because I worked on so many campaigns, I started building that coalition. And even though I lost my first race when I ran for city council, I ultimately ended up getting appointed to the city council because we had a vacancy. But I spent the next 8 years building those coalitions through the community, attending community events. I built it through through the Republican Party, by volunteering with the Republican Party, by volunteering to help candidates run for office, and working with different groups in the community itself and supporting those different groups. And so eventually, after 8 years, we had an opening in the state assembly, and I was very well positioned at that point to run for that seat. And I ended up ultimately getting elected to the state assembly, really because I had spent 8 years getting prepared for it.
Okay, so you just knew. So did you just feel like you knew at that time, like, this is the next step, like it's time for me to go to maybe a higher office, if you will?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was a mom of 4. I had my oldest at the time was in 7th grade. My youngest was in 3rd grade. And I just decided that I wanted to be a role model for my kids. And my husband was very supportive of it. He has always supported my career. And we figured out a way to make it work, being a team, working together, allowing me the opportunity to work during the week in Sacramento and be home on the weekends. But ultimately, when that position came open for the state assembly, I just felt that I had worked so hard that it was the next step for me. And I really wanted to take on that challenge.
Awesome.
Talking more about your life in Congress, I want to ask what your day-to-day looked like, because I feel like some people have some misinterpretations of what being a congresswoman person looks like. So I just want to ask, like, how intense was it? Was it like, when did you wake up? Like the little bitty things that not a lot of people know.
Okay, what people don't really understand is when you come from the West Coast and you go to the East Coast, one of the most difficult things is the time change. It's a 3-hour time change. It's a lot easier to go from the East Coast to the West Coast than it is vice versa. I'll give you a general picture of sort of how my whole week unfolded when I was there. As was mentioned in the beginning, I was a member of Speaker Boehner and Speaker Ryan's leadership team. And what that meant was, on Mondays, when we had what you call fly-in day, that's when all the members would fly in to Washington, D.C., because we would vote Monday nights. We would have our leadership meetings at 4:00 in the afternoon. Well, I came from the West Coast, so either I had 2 choices. One was to take a red eye on Sunday night so I could make it in time for the meeting, or the other one was I could come in the day before. So I always chose to fly in on Sundays so that I could get myself well situated and have a full day Monday, and then have my have votes Monday night. The time really got the busiest starting on Tuesday because by then everybody was back in DC, and Tuesday mornings would usually start out with a meeting, like a breakfast meeting. like, we had to do a lot of fundraising because when you're in the U.S. House of Representatives, you have every 2 years you have to run for office. And so there's a lot of emphasis put on raising money. And so oftentimes what I would do is I would have a breakfast meeting with some lobbyist or some donors, and I would try to get a fundraising event out of the way in the morning, because our committee hearings usually didn't start till 9 or 10 o'clock. So typically I would go, I'd have a breakfast and then go to the office, and then we would have a hearing. My last 2 years, I sat on Energy and Commerce Committee. I sat on the Ethics Committee. And so, we would have meetings. It depends on when the committees would meet. Each committee was different, and we had subcommittees. So I usually had, a few hearings a week. But I would go to a committee hearing, and then we would have constituents would be at the Capitol, would want to meet with me, or there would be lobbying groups that want to meet on particular issues and particular legislation that was coming before us. So I would spend my time meeting with people. We had different caucuses. So like, for example, we had a women's caucus, which was bipartisan, and I was vice chair of that. I think it was vice chair was my title my last couple of years. And so we would maybe have a caucus meeting, and then we would maybe have a lunch with some more constituents, or with a fundraising lunch. And then in the afternoon, it was still more meetings, but a lot of it was going over the legislation, like with your staff as well. What legislation did I want to introduce? What legislation was being introduced? And then before you knew it, I would have a meeting maybe with the speaker or different leaders on different issues. So you were pulled in so many different directions. The other thing that people didn't understand was we would have to vote sometimes 3 times a day. After debate would take place and there would be bills on the floor that had to be voted on, they would call the roll, and we had 15 minutes to get to the floor to vote. And sometimes we would be stuck in a meeting. And if I had a constituent from out of town, and I didn't want to be rude, but I had 15 minutes to get to that floor to vote, or else I would miss a vote. And by the way, if you missed votes, that would be used against you in your reelection, because that would be a hit piece on you for not showing up to vote. But you had 15 minutes literally to get to the floor to vote on whatever legislation was being presented before you. We would have to know what the legislation was, how I should vote on it, what the pros and cons were on that legislation. We sometimes had, 20 bills we were voting on. All of that information takes time to learn and to understand. And so you sometimes were just on the fly, just, being double booked or having to leave meetings to go vote. I mean, it was a very, very long day. And I, started early in the morning and sometimes wouldn't get home until 9 o'clock at night. And then I was on California time. So I'd be getting phone calls at 9 o'clock at night talking to people about California issues. So I remember after I came back to California, when I left Congress, I sat down with a former member of Congress, a man by the name of Chris Cox. Chris Cox actually had been the member of Congress in my seat before. It was Chris Cox, then John Campbell, and then I had the seat. So John Campbell took his spot because Chris ended up becoming the chairman of the SEC. And this was when Bush was president. And so Chris said to me, we had lunch one day, and I said, Chris, what's it like when you're no longer back in DC? He had been a congressman for 18 years before he went to the SEC. And he said, your life is going to slow down, and you're going to appreciate life so much more because you're going to have a chance to take a breath. And that is so true. And that is what happened to me. In fact, it was hard for me in the beginning because I was so used to always being on the go and always having to be prepared. And I never had a chance to relax. And the good news about my life now is I have that chance, and I've been able to take a step back and sort of look at everything and appreciate it more, much more than I did when I was in the middle of it.
Yeah, definitely. Do you feel that the 2-year terms are almost too short, do you think, because you have to worry about re-election consistently versus other offices like the Senate of 6-year terms? I know there was a point behind that in the Constitution, but do you think like that 2 years like made it more exhausting, that you're always on your feet because you have to worry about fundraising? I mean, 2 years flies by, as we know. So
Yeah. 2 years does go by awfully quickly. I know the reason why we have 2 years, and I don't think I would change it, because if you gave 4-year terms, that's too long, I think, in Congress, because you've got 6 years with the Senate. And I think 2 years is sufficient. However, having said that, you do constantly, you get elected, and boy, if you're in a targeted race, in a targeted seat, you've got to start thinking right away about fundraising and getting ready for that next election. There is no downtime. You have to be constantly working toward it, and it's extremely competitive. And what you see on the federal level versus what you might see on a state level, and certainly the local level, is the exposure is so much greater, and there's so much more money that is invested in these congressional seats and these congressional races. And that is primarily because it's the balance of power. Whoever is going to get the majority in the House and the majority in the Senate carries a tremendous amount of weight as the agenda for the future of this country. And it's extremely, extremely competitive.
And going back to Congress, there's 535 members within Congress, 100 in Senate, 435 in the U.S. House of Representatives. Did you get a chance to personally meet all of them, or how do you meet with everyone and form those relationships on both ends of the party?
I was only there for 4 years, so I did not get to meet everybody. What the first order of priority for me was to meet everybody in my caucus. We called it, in the Republican caucus, we called it a conference. So when I was there, was something like 200 and I don't even remember, like 37 or 43. We had over, we had a majority the 4 years I was there. And so my number one rule was try to get to know all my members. And that took a while, because you could imagine, roughly 240 something members of Congress, just to get to know your own people in your own conference took a lot. I also had a lot of relationships on the Democrat side from the members of Congress from California, because I had done 10 years in the California state legislature, and several of my colleagues went from the California state legislature to Congress. So I knew a lot of the California Democrats. And remember, California has 53 members of Congress. And so that out of 435, 53 is a big number. So I had a pretty good foundation, but I never did get to meet all of the members of the Democrat Party that were members of Congress, because there just wasn't enough time in the day, and I was just not there long enough to be able to have that opportunity. There's 435 people is an awful lot. And then the Senate, we didn't really work with the Senate that closely. There were a few pieces of legislation that I had that I worked with some senators on. But for the most part, both houses are separate, and you pretty much deal with the Republican and Democrats in the House when you're in the House. And then the senators pretty much dealt with the senators. Sometimes there was crossover, but not nearly like that with their colleagues in the House.
And going back to Congress, there's roughly around a quarter of the representatives in Congress so far are women, but substantially less are Republicans. What was it like being part of that significantly small minority of women in Republican Congress?
Well, I was also in the minority when I was in the California state legislature as a Republican woman. I think when I was there, I believe we had 14 senators on the Republican side in the state, and I was the only female. So I was very used to being the only female in the room with my colleagues. And it didn't really bother me because I was used to it. I always felt that my male colleagues gave me respect, all those same respect that they gave each other. I never felt like they were being buddies and I wasn't a part of it. They never treated me that way. And I always felt like, we had a good relationship. But I've never really been like a girly girl, if you will. I've always sort of been I was a bit of a tomboy growing up, and I have two brothers, and So always got along very well with the men. And I always felt like it was more of an opportunity for me being the only woman in the room, because I offered a different perspective than the men had. And I think I had an opportunity to really have them see a different view on some legislation, and ultimately we're able to persuade them to see my side.
Awesome. So I guess now we talked a little bit about this before, but being from Orange County, I just kind of wanted your take on this. What do you think about GOP efforts in the county and maybe the trends? Do you see maybe a change back to how we were before as time kind of goes on, given that it did flip in 2018? Was that any visceral response to the administration, or do you think that's just indicative of a change in demographics? I don't know, because I know people are moving a lot and things change.
Yeah. Well, I think Orange County demographically is changing. There's no denying that. Absolutely. I think the Republicans need to do a better job of reaching out to those different communities, which we traditionally haven't. What really changed in this last election, I think, which had a very big impact on the 2018 election, actually two things happened. One was when Donald Trump won his race in 2016, it was the first time in 80 years, and this was since President FDR ran, that a Democrat nominee won Orange County. So in other words, Hillary Clinton won Orange County. Had it always been a Republican nominee for president winning since FDR, and that was 80 years. So right then and there, Nancy Pelosi looked at Orange County and said, okay, we see a target here 4 years from now, because the fact that Donald Trump did not win the district or win Orange County at all, that tells us something. So right then and there, we had, a target on our back. Everybody who was from Orange County did. And of course, we had two members of our conference not run for re-election. That was Ed Royce and that was Darrell Issa. So those two seats were open, which made it even better for the Democrats, because then they didn't have to take on 4 incumbents. They only had to take on 2 incumbents, and they had 2 open seats. So that narrative played very well into their hand. The other issue that was a very big issue that changed was the fact that in 2018, the California state legislature had a new law that was in place for the 2018 election, and that was called ballot harvesting. And we had never had ballot harvesting before in the state of California. And what ballot harvesting means is that if you're an absentee voter, it used to be that if you didn't turn your ballot in for some reason to the registrar of voters or send it through the mail, you could have somebody else turn that ballot in for you, but they had to be related to you, or it had to be a power of attorney. The rules changed and the law changed when the legislature decided that they were going to allow anybody to collect ballots. And so now anybody can go to somebody's home and collect a ballot. Now, what the Democrats were very good about doing in 2018 is they were very good at collecting those ballots. When I ran my race, I tried to do a ballot harvesting program. We tried it in the primary, but my voters were reluctant to give up their ballots to our volunteers. We also obviously did it in the general election as well. We had the same challenges because our voters didn't trust that somebody coming to their door would turn in their ballot. So we were unable to have an effective ballot harvesting program in place. On election day, I had won the election. I had over 6,000 votes. And a week later, I lost. And I lost by 12,500 votes. So if you take those two numbers, that was an 18,500 vote swing, almost unheard of. So from election day winning to a week later losing. Ballot harvesting, that strategy has played significantly into how the outcome of these races in 2018. Now the Republicans have gotten a little bit better about ballot harvesting, and they've put out boxes to try to collect ballots. I don't know how that's going to work. We're in a whole different dynamic now with this pandemic and what's happening with the way people are going to be voting this time. So I'm really curious to see what's going to happen in 2020 and what the outcome is going to be. So it's not that far off. We'll see what happens in Orange County.
Definitely, yeah.
Awesome. And we have a question from one of our associates who joined in on this roundtable's discussion. So if you want to ask a question.
First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to all of us. I just wanted to quickly ask, so I was a little curious about the statement that you just made about vote harvesting or ballot harvesting. So just seeing as like, there's going to be so many obstacles to really determining who like the people really want to be the president in the upcoming election, be that, maybe some people are feeling threatened to go out and vote either for their personal health or their like personal safety. But then on the other hand, there's also this issue of this unprecedented amount of mail-in votes, along with like really rampant election interference from Iran and China. So I was just wondering what your perspective is and whether or not this could cause like somewhat of a crisis of legitimacy for whoever's going to be the next president, and kind of what you think the Republican response to that will be, because the president has been very vocal about potentially challenging the results. So I was just wondering your perspective on that.
That's a really good question. And clearly we're in unprecedented times. There has been a lot of concern about this election. The fact that people are being mailed their ballots. Typically it would be, I request an absentee ballot. Now I'm being mailed a ballot. What if, somebody is not still alive and hasn't voted in many elections and they're still getting a ballot? That obviously is a very, very big concern. I will say that I would have to give our elected officials some credit here, that they understand the challenges we're up against. And one thing I will say, I have never seen in my lifetime, or maybe I just haven't paid attention to it in my lifetime, so much attention being paid to an election and so much attention being paid to the process of an election and the concerns of fraud in an election. And that is a good thing, because I think if anybody is going to try to deceive the voters and and there is going to be fraud or interfere with this election, I think our election officials are very aware of it and are taking the precautions necessary to make sure that that doesn't happen. So I think that this could be a positive coming out of this whole thing. I just remember, and you all were too young to even remember this, and I don't know, maybe you probably were just born, but when we were turning the century from 1999 to 2000, there was all this concern about what was going to happen, and computers were going to shut down, and Y2K was going to happen, the 2000, oh my gosh, and everybody was freaking out that we would wake up on January 1st, 2000, and the world basically was going to come to an end and stop. Nothing happened. And it went on like any other day, except we were in a new century. And so I am not as concerned as many people are out there about what the interference and will we know who the next president's going to be? I think we're going to know who the next president is going to be pretty closely to election day. Think about it. It's the swing states as far as the president's concerned that he's got to worry about. And it comes down to a handful of states that are really going to determine who the next president of the United States is. And I don't think it's going to take us weeks or months to figure that out.
Thank you.
Yeah. Speaking about unprecedented times, it feels like, 2000, there was that worry about 2012 with the movie, but now, it seems like we're in this weird time as well where things are so uncertain, especially because of this pandemic. But I want to specifically ask about Orange County, because it's not normal times. Usually we have this discussion in person, but I want to ask about your thoughts on the COVID response that Orange County has done in the California response to COVID-19. And, the Orange County Board of Supervisors rejecting mandatory mask compliance. How do you think the the response from Orange County, from California, has been for the coronavirus?
Well, I support what the Orange County Board of Supervisors have done. My biggest concern has been what are the unintended consequences of COVID-19. I remember Governor Newsom when this first happened, and Governor Newsom was trying to scare everybody, and he literally said that, we could have, now I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was something like millions of people could be infected by this COVID-19 in 8 weeks if we don't do something. I mean, something so horrific that it scared so many people. And I believe that he should have never done that. We've had over, 200,000 people have passed away in this country from it, which of course you don't ever want to see that happen. But a lot of the people are elderly and they have other ailments. And so then they got this, and then that was the reason they passed away. So I think we have to look at this with caution and look at personal responsibility. But I also think we cannot shut down this economy and stop and close businesses, because the ramifications of what's going to happen from the policies that have been put in place are going to far exceed what's happened with the effects of people in COVID-19. And we have to be very, very careful of that, because I don't think we've even felt the effects of what's to happen with some of these businesses who are barely hanging on, and they still can't open up. You look at these restaurant owners, barely hanging on, and we continue to not allow people to go into restaurants and eat. In another few months, it's going to have a huge effect on more and more small businesses. So I think we have to be very careful when it comes to weighing, allowing businesses to open up, allowing people to be together versus shutting everything down, because the isolation and what it's doing to people and their mental health, and the suicide number is up, is very, very harmful to our society.
So in terms of, I guess now we're kind of talking about the presidency and some of the COVID-19, all that. What did you think about just the competing town halls last week and kind of what unfolded, how they were at the same time and all that? And then also, what are your thoughts kind of coming up for this last debate? We'd love to hear. I mean, it's something that millions of people are going to be watching. And I feel like a lot of people just want information out of this, just given that the first time was a lot of bantering back and forth. And so whatever your take is on this, we'd love to hear. But yeah.
Yeah. So obviously they're both competing to be president of the United States. So they were having competing town halls to see who would tune into their town hall. Okay, whatever. The debate, I hope, is more civil this next time. And I believe that it was a real turnoff to the public from the first debate, where they were respectful of each other. Now, was it done by design? I'm not part of Trump's strategy team, so I can't tell you if he did it on purpose or if he just did it because that's who he is and his personality. But I will be very interested to see what happens on Thursday in this next debate, because I really do believe, like you said, people want to see the difference between the two candidates, and they want to be informed and they want to hear what the issues are. And I think they owe it to the American people. And by the way, they're supposed to be examples to the rest of us. We're supposed to look at whoever the president is, and they're supposed to be respected, and they're supposed to set a tone, and they are supposed to be the ones that are leaders. And young people look up to them and want to emulate them, and they need to be more respectful of each other. And the American people deserve that.
Definitely. Thank you for that. And then on that note, also, this is just interesting, but what do you think about like the mic controls? I mean, one of the concerns last time was people talking over the moderator, not being able to keep control of what's going on. Do you think that the commission should put in place maybe a mic muting or something like that, just along the lines of both like to talk a lot, right? And it's just, you can't have dialogue if people are going back and forth like that. And not.
If they try to mute the mics, then you're going to have people complaining about, people did have freedom of speech. I mean, you just can't win.
Yeah.
I feel very badly for those moderators. I mean, I think Chris Wallace did as best as he could. I think Susan Page, she did the vice presidential debate, and I think ultimately she did fine. She didn't have as much of a problem. But this next debate, I don't know why they're just having one moderator. They used to have 3 moderators, and why they're just having one, I don't know. Maybe because of COVID,
That's
they
what I was.
feel like they can't put them next to each other would probably be the reason. But I think it's an incumbent upon the candidates to show respect and restraint, and I think they should be held accountable to it. I feel for those moderators, I really do.
God, I can't imagine.
Yeah, last week we just had our debate with Trojan Democrats and College Republicans, and me and director of political students, and we were both the moderators. And at first I was like, kind of angry at Chris Wallace for what he was doing, but afterwards I was like, man, Chris Wallace was doing his absolute best up there.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the poor guy just got severely criticized afterwards. And it's like, put yourself in his place of what he had to put up with. My goodness, the guy did the best as he could.
Definitely.
And Dariush has a question once again.
Yeah, I just have another question about sort of like the response to COVID. You mentioned businesses are struggling. I mean, I definitely see that where I live. There's everywhere's putting up signs like 90% off, have to get rid of everything, and but you walk in and the guy that's actually selling you the stuff, you can tell he's sad, like he's closing down his livelihood, like he has to find something completely new to do. And I just think that's really devastating. I think the stock market being propped up sort of artificially is contributing to people not really understanding the severity of the recession that we're on the brink on. But kind of to that point, how I just want to know your perspective on, we see other countries, for example, the UK, even though they've had recent spikes again, a huge portion of the UK has opened up and people don't even have to really wear masks when they're going out and about and going into restaurants. People can resume life. We even saw in China, they had a huge, concert that, everyone was spreading the picture of on social media, which was really shocking because it was that was sort of thought to be the origin point of the virus and where the largest spread happened. So it's just, what could we have done better? What could we have done to be at the point that these other countries are at right now, where they're actually able to resume their business, they're able to reopen their economies without the fear of contracting this illness and continuing to spread it?
Well, I think you just said it. It's the fear. And I think some of our elected officials are putting unnecessary fear in people. And that's what the tone has got to change. I mean, the numbers just aren't there like they said they were going to be there. And I remembered what Gavin Newsom said. He said 25 million people in California were going to, or could not, 25 million people in California could catch the COVID virus in 8 weeks, is what he said to the California people. And that kind of fear is completely unnecessary, and he should have never said that. But some of these policies that are in place, like Gavin Newsom said, go out to eat, but every time you take a bite, put your mask back over your mouth while you're chewing. Seriously, is that what people are really going to do? It's a matter of having respect. Sure, go out, put a mask on, but allow these businesses to open up. What's the problem is that the elected officials are not giving our business owners the respect that they deserve to understand what's in the best interest for them. They don't want people to get sick, but they can have their business and be social distance. They have tools in place. I remember just even going to get my hair done. I mean, my hairdresser could have opened up months before Newsom allowed him to open up, because he had already put everything in place that was going to protect his customer. But the government wouldn't do it. And I fault those people that are in charge of making those decisions, because they're the ones that are not giving more confidence in the American people to run their businesses. And by the way, it is going to have huge ramifications. Wait till we go into 2021. We haven't seen anything yet, because these businesses are about to die. And what's that going to do? Even the economy is going to be much worse. And think about all the other hardships, and then we're going to have more mental health issues, because people are going to be desperate for a living. And this is what's happening now is just wrong. And we need to have more confidence in people in this country. And our leaders aren't giving it to them.
I definitely do understand that, and thank you for that answers. But sort of what I was more so asking, as far as the economy goes, I completely agree that, you know, we're really facing something crazy, like really bad here. But I'm speaking more from like the health perspective, as far as the actual spread of the virus.
Mhm.
I'm you know, I feel like what's contributed to these other countries being able to sort of rebalance, restabilize their economies is that they actually mitigated the public health crisis in the first place. Whereas I don't know, you know, if you agree or not. Especially in the United States, we've really done a lot of things wrong. At least from, you know, the numbers that are publicly accessible, and what sort of you know, the Dr. Fauci has been saying and whatnot. Even though, you know, you can't trust one person for everything.
Right.
You know, it's sort of, I meant, what do you think we should have done differently to protect people more from contracting the illness?
I don't have an answer of what we should have done differently. You know, if you look at China, China has 1 billion people, or billion plus people, whatever, so they have more people than we do. And honestly, I wouldn't believe whatever China tells you and whatever comes out of China, because they're not going to ever tell us the real story. The UK doesn't have as many people. We have, you know, over 300 million people in the United States. It's a much larger number than a lot of these other countries that are very, very small, that, you know, haven't seen the same effects, because again, they're dealing with a lot smaller numbers. So I don't think anybody has a magic wand out there to say, this is what we should have done, this is what we shouldn't have done, because no matter what you do, there's going to be unintended consequences. And it's a balancing act between making sure that people have their individual freedom, making sure that people can have an income and have, you know, put food on the table for people. And then you have to balance that with the health risk. What we do know is we have not had millions and millions of people die of COVID-19. Although, you know, 218,000, whatever the number is right now, of course, that is too many. But my question is, how many really died of COVID-19, and how many died of something else, but they happen to have tested positive for COVID-19, so now they are being considered being dead from COVID-19. I think we have to drill down to what the real numbers are, because I'm not even sure what they're telling us are the real numbers, because there's so many factors that go into somebody's health and when they're ill. And, you know, were they exposed to COVID-19? Weren't they exposed to it? So I think there's a lot of unanswered questions. And I don't think anybody has an answer of what we could have done anything differently. But what we do know, it's not as bad as what everybody said it was going to be.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's certainly a very, you know, complicated situation right now. And businesses are hurting. My favorite barber shop, they're on the second floor of this plaza, and there's like a pho restaurant, a Vietnamese restaurant on the first floor. So they try to move everything outside to, you know, increase the air quality and so forth. What they didn't realize, when you cut people's hair, it goes flying everywhere. So all the hair is falling down on the pho restaurants. So it's been a really, really interesting situation for a lot of, you know, small businesses and so forth. But my question I really want to ask is, you know, in your time in Congress, did you see a change in the level of polarization in Congress and in the federal government during your time there? And how can we help confront this growing polarization within our government and country?
What people don't see is when both sides get along and pass legislation and actually work together. The public doesn't see that. And the public doesn't see that because it doesn't make good for good news. I will agree there is more polarization, but not enough play is getting to the bipartisanship that happens in Washington, D.C. either. And I think, unfortunately, I think that social media has contributed to the polarization. I do think the rhetoric coming out of the White House and the candidates, the candidate for president, the rhetoric has got to stop. I think that elected officials need to tone down their rhetoric, because they are not setting a good example, as I mentioned before, for younger generations. And they need to be more respectful. And it's as if we need to have more adults in the room. And I'm very disappointed in that. And I think that contributes to the polarization, because people get very emotional about it and emotional about issues, and that doesn't help. But I would hope and I would wish that the media would focus a little bit more on where both Republicans and Democrats work together. And that would help. But again, that doesn't sell newspapers, that doesn't get people's attention. So their job is to try to get as many people to pay attention to what they're saying. And the media needs to use sound bites, and the media needs to, emphasize when neither side gets along. And that's, to me, unfortunate.
And speaking about going back to your college experience a little bit, UCLA, USC, and most universities, I would say, are traditionally very liberal areas of field. And to our conservative viewers watching this or entering college, what advice would you give them attending a more liberal university, or how to deal in more political conversations?
Well, I think you shouldn't be afraid to speak your mind and always have your facts. I mean, when you're going into a political discussion, it can be very controversial. I think if people had facts on their side, they should win the argument. Too much of the politics is emotional these days, and people are just talking with their feelings and not listening to the facts. And the other thing I think I see too often that's unfortunate is people not giving each other the respect to listen to their point of view. If somebody has a point of view, listen to what they have to say. You can agree or disagree, but don't get all angry about it. Just, if you don't see eye to eye with somebody, you say your argument, let them say their argument, and you can agree to disagree, but don't let it ruin your life. I mean, we see so many people take these issues so personal that it almost like destroys their life. It's like, really? That's all you've got? I mean, life is so much more than that. It's as if you got to get over it, but you really just need to communicate and respect each other and respect each other's point of view. I will tell you right now that I have people that are friends of mine on the Republican side of the aisle, but they're sort of flip-floppers. Like, they'll say yes to you, and then they'll say yes to that person. It might be opposite of what you said. And so you don't really know where they're coming from. And so they don't have really deep feelings about an issue, or deep thought about an issue, or deep belief about an issue. And then on the other side, I have friends of mine who I vehemently disagree with their point of view. I would never agree with them, don't understand why they agree with them, but you know what? They're passionate about their belief, and they believe what they believe for a reason. And I have more respect for that person who I totally disagree with, but I respect the fact that they're passionate about it and that's their core belief, versus somebody who's just going to tell you what you want to hear and is sort of a flip-flopper and doesn't really have a personal belief one way or the other. Now, over time, your beliefs might change. That's okay. You evolve, you change your mind on things. I know I certainly have in my life. That's part of life. But if you have a core belief and you really do believe it, then share that with somebody, and don't try to say something just because you want to be somebody's friend and you don't want them to get mad at you. That's wrong.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I do think it has become so emotionally charged, and I see it online a lot, and it's just something that's, I think, gone wrong with this generation. But now, in terms of we talked about the emotion, I feel like a lot of this comes from media consumption and what you're looking at, whether you get notifications on your phone from a certain app that's just feeding you all this information or whatever. It's very instantaneous, right? What do you recommend students do to kind of get the facts? What channels? I know I love ABC7. It's more local news, but they do a good job just covering what's going on here, because as much as there's political news, there's still so many other things happening in LA, Orange County. And so but in terms of maybe political news and all that, where do you think the best facts come from? And what do you recommend students do to kind of bring it together, if you will?
Gosh, there's a lot out there. There are. And if you're, I don't know, on the Democrats side, there's certain media outlets that sort of cater towards the beliefs that, maybe people on the left believe in, on the right. We have certain media outlets that we believe in. So, for example, somebody on the left might really trust what CNN has to say. Somebody on the right might really trust what Fox has to say. So I think media, they have to really have a relationship with the viewer who's going to believe what they say. And the more they just get discredited, and the more that they are shown to not have factual information, or where you see on social media, sometimes, somebody will have a video and only a portion of it will get posted, and then there'll be a headline and it's completely wrong. And it's not anything the person said. It was just a clip of what the person said. And so the message gets sent wrong. And I think that media services, they do themselves a total disservice, because once you have somebody who watches your show and you start not reporting accurate information, you're going to lose your audience, and then people aren't going to trust you. And so there'll be media outlets that people say, I'm never going to listen to what they have to say because they don't tell me the truth. And that's incumbent upon the media. So there is so much out there. It's hard for me to pinpoint exactly who, students should trust, but I think that's an individual decision based on information that you get. Now, I will tell you, because of social media and everything so instantaneously, if a media outlet comes out with false information, we all know about it. We all know about it because we see it on our phones.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing, because that's a checks and balances. So that's actually a positive.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I wanted to ask about your experience as mayor of Laguna Niguel, especially, as being mayor, you run part of the city's police budget. And, I feel like I'm in a conflicted position because my parents are small business owners, and we've relied heavily on the police for support in protecting our businesses. But yeah, I feel like, nationally we're having this call for police reform, even defunding. I want to get your thoughts on how can we improve police relationships with the community?
I think, first of all, there are some bad actors in police forces that hide behind police unions. And I think that is a relationship between your local city councils and your police union, because what happens is the unions negotiate contracts with the city, and then the unions give protections to their police officers. That, in my opinion, is where the fundamental breakdown is. And I am very supportive of the police. I've always had great experiences with the police. I think number one, people want to feel safe, and they look to their police officers. Defunding the police is the absolute wrong thing to do. I think it's absolutely ludicrous that people talk about defunding the police. Who do they think is going to take care of them if there's an issue? If you defund the police, who's going to protect you? It's so ridiculous, I can't even talk about how ridiculous that is. But having said that, I think that police reform is not a bad thing. But we also have to allow police officers and those who are trained to protect us to tell us the tools they need. For example, we heard one of the presidential candidates say, oh, why not just shoot somebody who's coming after you in the leg? Okay, there's a reason our police officers don't shoot people when they're being shot out in the leg. There's a reason why, okay? Because you're trying to defend your life, and they have a right to defend their life. So I think we have to listen to protocols that the police need, and we should not be legislating what they should and should not do when it comes to protecting us. And that's what I think you're starting to see, and it's going to come back and backfire on us, on those elected officials who are advocating for that.
I just have another quick question about that, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I'm sorry, let me turn my camera on.
Amal, where are you? There you are.
So yeah, I mean, obviously if your life is being threatened as a police officer or as anyone, and you do have something at your disposal where you can protect your life, I mean, I don't really think that's even a question of what you're supposed to do. But as far as legislators not determining what law enforcement should and should not do, I'm just curious, like, wouldn't that cause like a slight issue of like checks and balances as far as, the police, they're there to enforce the law. They're not there to be the law. They're not there to create the law or decide the law. So for example, if I personally, I'm not a proponent of people owning guns, but I understand that it is a constitutional right, and depending on how you interpret the Constitution, I mean, your rights are your rights. I just don't agree with it, but that doesn't really, but, so let's just say that for people that get the police called on them if they're having some sort of mental health crisis, or they have, there was that example with the young man that had autism, and he was having like a sort of a breakdown, or like he was getting overloaded, and then the police officers that came just sees somebody who's distressed and acting erratically and responds how he thinks he should respond. Not, he hasn't been trained on that. He hasn't been told what to decide on that situation by people who are more informed on that than he is. So I was just, when people say defund the police, I don't really understand what that means, but I mean, do you agree that there needs to be a fundamental change in what the protocol is when it comes to certain, sensitive events happening and police responses to them?
First of all, I totally agree with you that police job is to enforce the law. Absolutely. But what I was referring to is when the police have to make a split-second decision when they're in a crisis, they should be able to defend themselves. They shouldn't have to have the legislature tell them that they can and can't do certain things when it comes to somebody that is threatening them. That's what my concern is. And I will just give you an example, and whether it's right or wrong, but a chokehold. I don't know if a chokehold's good or if a chokehold is bad. But what I do know is that a legislator should not be making that decision if a police should be able to use a chokehold or not use a chokehold. Because number one, 99.999% of the time, that legislator has never been a police officer and has never been in that situation. And I can speak from experience. As legislators, we are expected to make decisions on a lot of issues that we've never personally experienced. We usually have never personally experienced issues that we're making decisions on. And that's the difference right there. So if you are somebody who is trained to be a law enforcement and they train a certain way, those are the leaders that need to make the decision what's right and what's wrong given what's happening. But when it comes to somebody who's mentally ill, and here's where I really do believe we need better training for our law officers, is in the mental health area. And I say that because mental health is becoming so much more prevalent in our society. It's becoming more prevalent and people talking about it more. It used to be people would sort of sweep it underneath the rug and they were embarrassed about any mental health issues in their families. And now people are opening up about it and it's getting a lot more attention. Again, that's a good thing, but I do believe that our officers probably need more training in dealing with people with mental health issues, because I speak from experience in my own family with a son who has a mental health issue, and I have firsthand experience. And as a parent, I didn't know what I was doing. And so it can be very, very difficult. So they're put in tough spots. I mean, police officers, I have a tremendous amount of respect for them. They're put in very, very difficult positions every day of their life. And, we're grateful for that.
Well, thank you so much for that response, Mrs. Walters. And thank you so much for taking an hour and talking to us about your life, about the impact that you've made in our community and for our country as well. So that wraps up our roundtable discussion.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much,
Thanks so much,
Walters.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
Bye, guys.